Thank you, Andre. Korea is called the Miracle of the Han River, and the Han River flows through the center of Seoul. I just learned how to pronounce that correctly. Thank you, Jim. And it also forms a significant part of the demilitarized zone. And it's a miracle that in the Republic of Korea has come so far so fast, which is how it gets its name. Today, the Republic of Korea, South Korea, faces significant challenges with North Korea, with strongly competitive world trade and continuing disputes with Japan over comfort women and disputed territories. And they have great opportunities with growing friendships with China, Southeast Asia, and Africa. A little bit about our speaker, who you all know quite well. Jim McGibney was club president from 2011 to 2012. He's been manager of design and construction for a number of prominent buildings in Denver. He is also an electrical engineer and has served on a number of regional boards of directors. This is intentionally short, and I'm not even the author. Jim offered to write this intro for himself because he's so humble. But I just want to say that we're going to spend most of the time talking about Korea and his program, as we should be. And please help me welcome Jim McGibney. Thank you.
안녕하세요. Come, have a unique, unforgettable convention experience. Connect with Korea. Touch the world. Connect with Korea and touch the world. Come join us at the 2016 Rotary International Convention in Seoul, Korea.
안녕하십니까. 저는 콜로라도 명예 영사 제임스 McGibney입니다. 미안합니다. 한국어로 잘 못합니다. 영어로 주세요. It's nice to see everybody this evening, or this afternoon, and I really appreciate the time. We have an expert in the room with Mr. Young Cho for the period of time that I'm going to be talking about, and he's sitting back here, so when the program's over, make sure you talk with him as well. Today we're going to talk about the Republic of Korea. They're celebrating this year the 70th year of independence from the Japanese rule. That rule started in 1910 and ended, the occupation started in 1910 and ended in 1945. And since 1945, they have been building. But the country started in a very, very tough position. The Korean War itself was over in 1953, and in 1960, the per capita GNP was $80 a year. You probably did better in Ghana and Sudan. And at that time, people were starving in the streets. People were looking for work. It was just the things we take for granted were a luxury. And that's what formed the soul and the heart of Korea and the hard-working people that you see today. Young Chol knows that knows that time, and he knows that time well. And I do encourage you to talk to him because what they have done since is quite amazing. Let's talk about Korea very quickly, though. What you're looking at is a fairly good overview between North and South Korea. The demarcation line that you see in the center is the 38th parallel, and I'll have another look at that in a few minutes. That's originally where the demarcation was between North and South. And the reason that this country was broken apart in 1945 was because the Russians and the U.S. talked together, and they needed to know where the Japanese were going to surrender. And the Japanese, portions of the Japanese were going to surrender to the Russians, and portions were going to surrender to the Americans. And so an arbitrary line was put through Korea at the 38th parallel, and that demarcation started as the DMZ. It was later modified, and I'll show you that in just a few minutes. But when you look at that, because it was arbitrary, the minute that was set, the Russians closed that border, and there was no discussion between anybody and the Russian army, and they began to arm the South. If you look north, though, which is up, you can see where China is, and if you look to the far right, you can see where Russia begins. So it's a neighborhood that is not conducive to a lot of good friendships. But what Korea, and the Republic of Korea is what South Korea is called, what they've done in the intervening 70 years is extraordinary. The Korean War ended in 1953. GNP was 1.3 billion. 2 years ago, it was 1.3 trillion. I mean, if you look at the per capita, at the end of the Korean War, it was $66. The per capita today is $25,009. Exports, it was limited after the Korean War. It was mainly raw materials. Exports today, they are one of the most sophisticated exporters of large ships. Hyundai is the manufacturer. They are one of the most sophisticated exporters of vehicles, the Kia, and of course the Hyundai, which is a magnificent vehicle. Semiconductors, they actually lead the world. And then you look at exports. In 1964, 120 million. Today, 573 billion. So the population at the end of the Korean War was 20 million. 3 million people died in that war. And today it's 50 million. And that's just the South Korean side. So real quickly, it's 100,000 kilometers, 50 million people, GDP, trade, foreign exchange reserves, inflation 3.1, and unemployment 4.2%. That's a success story. And especially when you figure that they started from nothing. But it didn't come easy. It was a lot of hard work. And when you look at the corporate 500 across the globe, and you start to see who all you got on it, right up the top you see Samsung, and then Hyundai. Hyundai's up there at the 55th, but Hyundai Heavy Industries is broken apart. And you'll find them back down there at 220. In other words, they have positions for some of the really great countries in our world today. And again, that all started 70 years ago because Korea had nothing. A little bit about our relationship. The relationship really started in 1866 when the General Sherman sailed up to Pyongyang. They had been told not to. Pyongyang is the current capital of North Korea. And they were told not to. They were asked to stop. They got up there, they burned the ship, and 24 people were killed. So in retaliation, Secretary of State Seward sent the USS Colorado and 4 other ships. They came ashore at Incheon, and 300 Koreans died, 350. So in 1882, there was a treaty of peace, amity, and navigation, and the hermit kingdom known as Goryeo came into the world. King Kojang, President Chester Arthur, Min Young-ik, the first foreign envoy, and Lucius Foote was the first U.S. minister to Korea. And that was the beginning. But there were some ties for us, too. But let's go through, then at the end, where the Republic of Korea came from, you can see these dates. 45 was the end of the occupation, and then you get into modernization. We get into economic development support. The United States actually supported Korea all the way through the 70s, and we're giving them stipends. The UN came into play. same thing. The UN was providing stipends. And for a number of years, South Korea was a recipient of aid. Today, they are a provider of aid. They are one of only 2 countries in the world that have changed. Do you know who Isabella Bird is? Isabella Bird comes to the foundation of Colorado, some of the early histories of Colorado and photographs. Isabella Bird went to Estes Park. She went to Estes Park from Korea. She was in Korea as it was beginning to emerge from the Hermit Kingdom and into the world and building these alliances in the late 1800s. And she took a number of photos. And here are just 4. I've just downloaded the whole story of her time in Korea. It's 850 pages. Looks to be a wee bit daunting, but I'm going to take it on. These are just some of the pictures that she took in Korea. And if you look her up, you'll find books that are equivalent for Estes Park and for the development of the mountains in Colorado. And what's interesting is the part of Korea that she was in is very much, it's where Gangwon province is today. It's very much the same as Estes Park. It was probably the areas that Young Cho easily skied in his early years. So today we're getting into the season called Chuseok. And today you had the first installment of Chuseok. And we're going to tell you a little bit about Chuseok. It's Korean Thanksgiving, and it's set by the lunar moon. Just remember that we're dealing with a whole range of religions in Korea. You're dealing with, we'll look at Buddhism, you're looking at Confucianism, Catholicism, and so there's a real melding of a whole group of cultures. The establishment of Chuseok was way back. It's a 5,000-year-old kingdom. I mean, they can trace their heritage to 2,000 years before the Christian era. So this is a lot of those customs come up through there. And Chuseok is Thanksgiving, and it's coming up in 2 weeks. It begins. And what happens is for 3 days, the people leave Seoul, they leave wherever they are, go back to their family, and they celebrate. And Nayana and I chose 3 years ago, we said we were going to go back to Korea, and we were going to be there at Chuseok. And we were warned that nobody would be in Seoul. We were warned that nothing would be open in Seoul, and that it might be a little boring for the first 3 days. We were there a total of 8 days. And they were right. There weren't very many people in Seoul, and we walked everywhere. And so we got to walk everywhere. The museums were all open, and they were free. And the cab rides were very, very cheap, but most of the time we would get up in the morning and we'd start walking, and we'd walk until the end of the day. And so I'm going to show you a few pictures of what it was like while we were there. This is at the north. This is Namdaemun Mountain. Namdaemun is the southern part of the city. It's at the south gate. And what you see there, that wall, is a wall that originally went all the way around Seoul. And while we were there during that week, the colors continued to change, and so we took a picture every day, and we sent it to all of our friends and said, Happy Chuseok from the Republic of Korea. As I said, the palaces are open at night. This is Gyeongho-ru. This is at night. They light them up. This is one of 2 times in the year that all of the palaces are lit, and you wander through. The families come out, and so you have people in each one of these temples everywhere. You've got children, and they have events, and they have music, and we were probably the only 2 Westerners in most of the palaces that we went to visit, and it was a kick. It was fun to see the families walking around, talking to the children, explaining the history. And this picture I think it was beautiful. It was taken with an iPhone. And I want to show you what that building really looks like. There's the daytime view of that palace. It was a greeting place. It was a place where you could do banquets. It was a place where that people could meet. And you can go into these any day. And there are several, and I'll explain those and just point them out in a minute. And this is the king's palace in Gyeongbuk. This is the king's building. This is where he lives. And to give you some sense of where this is located, it's right downtown Seoul. You can see the buildings behind. and see that you're right in the middle of the city. And it too is open at night. And if you look at the lower side of that, you can see all the people that are wandering around in there. And again, we were the only Westerners. We would sit over at the side and watch, and we could walk through there. We walked from the hotel to the palaces, and we walked, usually we walked back. Occasionally we'd take a taxi. It was just a very wonderful experience. A little detail from the King's Palace. And this is the inside. And rarely do they light the inside, and it wasn't lit very well, so you'll have to excuse the quality of that picture. The other palaces in Seoul, Gyeongbok was built, that's the first one, 1392. Cheondok was 1405. Cheonggyeong Palace, 1483. Gyeonghui was in 1600, and Dokso, 1907. And the interesting thing was the last palace was built just before the Japanese occupation, and it was built specifically to separate the king, who was in control of Korea at that time, from his people. And they had him separated, and then the Japanese came in and very simply took over the kingdom in 1910. Now, it wasn't a step function. There was infiltration, and it was a difficult period. I've seen one film on that period. I'm not sure how many exist, but it was a very difficult. Just really quickly, some highlights, lowlights. If you were Korean, you were not allowed to speak Korean. You had to speak Japanese. You had to have a Japanese name. You had to do business in the conventional Japanese manner. And then the Japanese came in and built their ministry building right in the middle of downtown Seoul, so it was always in everybody's face. So it was a very difficult time. During Chuseok, a lot of other interesting things happened. This is on the Han River, and we were walking along, and there was competition going on. And I was trying to figure out, because they were small cars, small battery-operated cars. And I went over, the gentleman to your right that's got the suit on, Yun Changban, he is a doctorate at the university. And this was a countrywide competition on how do you design a smart car. And each of the universities came in with miniature cars. They knew what the roadway was going to be, sort of, but the car had to have all the sensors in it, and it had to be battery-operated and sun-powered. And so it had a heel, and the road did this, and whoever's car got through there in the shortest amount of time without banging the wall was the winner. And it was really fun to watch that competition and all the kids at work. It's a time to visit museums. This is the National Museum of Korea. It was designed jointly by Junglim Architects of Seoul. It sits at the South Gate and Barkhan Lindberger of New York. It is, in my estimation, one of the most beautiful municipal buildings in the world. It is exceptionally well built. It houses all of the artifacts of Korea and all of the artwork. And there are other museums in Seoul. Remember, they're all free in Chuseok. There are 4 national museums, 9 municipal, and 67 private museums. So if you're in Korea during Chuseok, you easily get in to see it. This is one of my, this is as an engineer, this one's fine. Cheonggyecheon Stream, in 2003, actually, this was one of the first major Hyundai road projects. They came in and took this really kind of difficult, nasty little stream that ran right through the middle of Seoul, and they paved it. And that worked great for about 20 years. And the mayor of Seoul City, Im Young-bak, who later became the president of Korea, was looking for a specific project that he wanted to have as a guiding force for the redevelopment of Seoul, because they knew they were going to have to redevelop the entire city. And it basically changes about every 7 years. So what they did is they began working on bringing that stream back to life and giving it life. And what you see at 2005, it took them just at 3 years. They tore those highways out. They rebuilt it. That stream is now some 6 miles long. It runs right through the middle of Seoul. They have events in there all the time. There are waterfalls. Water comes in from the Han River, and it's open 24/7. It is just a kick to go see. And you know that they did it in that short a period. We couldn't do that in 20 years if we in Colorado. The other thing you can do, and I've done, is you can do a temple stay. which means that you can spend a half a day, you can spend a day, you can spend overnight at one of the temples and learn all about it. But as I said earlier, the Korean religion is very diverse, and yet they govern very well. The Buddhists are 22%, the Protestants 18%, Catholic 10%. Confucian is not really a religion. Confucian is a way of thinking. It's a structured way of thinking that guides all of Korea, and there are only about 3 to 5% of the people that say that that is their primary religion. It is not. It's not a religion, but yet it orders the structure where man is responsible to the king, your wife and children are responsible to you, and you are responsible to them. And it really sets the tone of how decisions get made. There is a beginning group of Muslims in Korea these days. By the way, the little white things in the ceiling there are all prayers. You can write a prayer. And this is right in the middle of Seoul. And it is a large, large temple, and it fills an entire hillside, and you can walk through it, and it really is quite calming. And one of the things we learned was how you do a Korean tea ceremony. I couldn't duplicate it if I had to right now. The Korean War started in 1950, as I said, and this is the seminal event that changed the country forever. It is the first UN war we ever fought. The United Nations was the primary player, and 16 member nations fought with them. Today, I work with the Korean War veterans in Denver, in Colorado Springs, and we're getting ready. We hope to do a monument in one of our cities. What we found is that we have Korean War veterans that are Ethiopian. We have, in Colorado, we have Korean War veterans that are Australians, that are British, and they live here, and they'll all be part of this. Because it took that coalition to deal with the attack that came from North Korea, Russia, China. And if you may not know the war, but the story is fairly interesting. They attacked, they pushed every one of the Allied forces down to the south end of the country to Busan. The Busan perimeter was established that held, and then MacArthur, in a very, very daring move, came right across it where today's Incheon Airport is. And he cut the supply lines and the travel lines for the Korean War, for the North Koreans. And so they began to fall apart. And they couldn't withdraw, and they were taken apart. They were very, very badly damaged. They got back up to the north, and then MacArthur took his troops north. And that's where it got very difficult. Oops, let me come back. And what I mean by difficult, they went past what's now the DMZ, and they went all the way to the Yalu River. And as I said, I work with the Korean War veterans here, and these are some really special people. And I know 2 of them made it all the way to the Yalu River and then fought their way back. What happened is they went beyond North Korea, they got up to the Yalu, they were recalled, and in the interim period, the Chinese had infiltrated 300,000 troops behind them. And so when they fought their way back, there were limited ways to get back. The Chosun Reservoir was one where the temperatures were dropping to 40 below zero, and we didn't supply our men correctly. They were in summer clothes when they were trying to fight that up. And the other way was to come right down the same road that they went up. And so they were cut apart. And there are men in Colorado Springs and men in Denver that fought those, that were in each one of those battles. And they are fascinating to talk to. And I would suggest if you have a moment and you'd like to spend a nice lunch, I can tell you where they meet, and you can go visit with them and get to know them, because they're getting older, and I consider these folks my friends now. They just celebrated the 66th anniversary of the armistice. So what you're looking at is the DMZ. The DMZ is about 2 kilometers wide, average, and it runs 160 miles from one coast to the other. It didn't come across the 38th parallel. This is the negotiated line. The negotiations occurred between the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Russians, the United States, and South Korea. And Ambassador Christopher Hill led some of the later talks. They called the 6-way talks, when they were trying to reestablish the friendship, and he's a member of our club, as you may know. So I've been on the DMZ. You'll see there are 4 demarcation points for tunnels. The North Koreans began digging tunnels immediately after the war was declared over. and there were 4 of them. I've been in the 4th tunnel. The tunnels are in solid granite. They're way down deep, and they're about this tall. So everybody wears a hard hat. And as we walked in, we walked right up to the border, and you could hear people behind go, ooh, ah, because you'd be hitting that roof with your hard hat. The one thing you can't do when you visit the DMC, you cannot give blood for 6 months. Tuberculosis is rampant on that side, on the other side, and so you have to be very, very careful. So these are just some of the things you see at the DMZ. There is an intense need to reunify North and South Korea. And as you see with this one, this is a big open earth. And what you don't see is in the middle is North Korea's is in relief. South Korea is in relief, so they will come together. And that's what they're hoping for, is one day to have relief. And in that zone, not far away, is an industrial city, Kaesong Industrial City, that was funded by Hyundai, the CEO of Hyundai, and the North Koreans. They put money together to build a place where North Koreans could work and South Korean companies could come up and build a business. And it really has worked only partially. But very close to it is this train station. It's called Dorasan Station. And Dorasan Station was going to be the connecting point for a rail that would go across China. And you could buy your ticket, get on the train there, go across North Korea, go across China, and go all the way into Russia. It has never opened to a single passenger. But you can still buy tickets today, if you'd like. It's a beautiful new building, and it sits there only as a monument for what could have been. And we wish that someday, I'm hopeful someday that North and South will come together and we can make that actually go to. I'm not going to read this. This is a quote from Christopher Hill talking about the war and talking about the most recent difficulties. I think the one thing that is important is in the last paragraph. The president of Seoul, Park Geun-hye, is going to be visiting China, and there is an amazing realignment. The young man who leads North Korea is probably so inexperienced he didn't know what he was doing when he set this last round off, and he got nothing out of it. His father and his grandfather would have these stunts every once in a while, and they'd get some concessions and some money. He got nothing. And his rule is beginning to break down, and right now, and Chris said it best, that the best thing to do is North Korea is not the equal of South Korea, neither in armament, neither in any of the social standards, in medical care, and should they go into unification, it will be very, very difficult. But my knowledge of the South Korean people, I'll tell you, they have a spirit, they have just this will to go in and make something happen, and they will make it happen, and it will be done correctly, but it's a big, big, tough job. Lastly, and then it is Gangwon Province. I've got a video for you to end with. Gangwon Province is this beautiful area which is just south of North Korea, and it's the mountains. It's where Isabella Bird took a lot of her photos. In 2018, in Pyeongchang, this little town, we got the Winter Olympics. And we, Colorado, are a sister state to the province of Gangwon. And so we are working very hard. We would like very much to connect our two parts of the world together and make sure that for the Olympics, we all participate, and that if we want to go visit, that we'll have a way to do that and get to know the people of Korea a little better. They're putting a high-speed rail line out to it. It's almost done. And it's very, 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 it's going to be a lot of fun. So hang on, and then Martin can tell you all about next year, 2016. When Rotary's there, we expect there will be 45,000 people, Rotarians, to be in Seoul. That's a big convention, and that'll be a lot of fun. There are still a lot of controversies. Dokdo Island, which is called Senkaku by the Japanese, it's disputed territory. Comfort women, there are 45 comfort women who still are alive today. They were sex slaves during the World War II for the Japanese. Japanese Prime Minister Abe is troubling. The good news is that he made a very difficult speech not so long ago, and the emperor came out and made a very conciliatory speech, so that helped a lot. I'm going to, what time do you have? I have, what? 12:53. That's about where I have. I had a number of slides that I was going to talk about what an honorary consul does, but I'm not going to do that. Let's just say that I'm the consul because Mr. Cho was gracious enough to put my name up for consideration. It has been for me and for my family, it has been just a spectacular opportunity to serve. Our children are Korean, and when our children joined our family, we incurred a debt that I finally have a chance to repay in some fashion, and I believe that is what we're doing as part of this honorary council. But I wouldn't be here without you, sir. And Mr. Cho, I thank you. Kamsahamnida. Lastly, I want to run a 5-minute video, because I'll give you your 2 minutes. And I wouldn't normally do this. It's a music video. It's a flash mob in Korea. This is 3 universities got together, and they funded $200,000 to put together a flash mob and to do it the right way. And they come into Insadon, which is a big shopping area, and they set up all of the microphones. Everything was set up in like all Korean things, whether it's K-pop, whether it's, you pick what that is. They work hard. They spend the money necessary. They practice, and it comes out, and you're going to see them start this program with Arirang, which is considered to be the unofficial anthem for the Republic of Korea, and it will morph into the national anthem, and I think you'll enjoy it.
Thank you very much, Jim. What a great presentation. I think it's extremely relevant to find out a little bit about the history, but a little bit about the current situation in Korea. And we hope that you will follow up with them and find out about the convention and about how to visit this terrific country that has done